has been that biggest
Precisely.
part between what is the ultimate, the ultimate.
Precisely, and that's what's fun about using a word like this is when you say, ultimately, you know, I'm talking about final causes now. Ultimately, you can judge things by the way they withstand.
I can see it in Catholic Vegas, so there's so many Christian professors that they feel like it's just dysfunctional,
Yeah.
strange field.
Well, that's what we're talking. Yeah. I mean,
like
again, I have to tread lightly
in
because
school, that's what I felt. That's what I'm feeling now.
yeah.
It's good in public school, maybe one of the most conservative schools I've seen.
Well, this here is dysfunctional. You know, this relationship. It's not a functioning relationship. The relationship that sprang up, and it's based on paradoxes.
Great level theater.
Yeah. So now, so basically, these two positions, which inform a dysfunctional relationship, the relationship of modernity, Protestants and the Enlightenment humanists, they basically converge, and the best historical example to see sort of a partisan instantiation of that coalescence is in the 17th century English Whig political party, which turns out to be, you know, much more important than it might sound. If you look at, just briefly, in 3 minutes, 17th century English politics, you see this Whig party is fiercely anti-Catholic, of course. They fiercely want the Stuart kings removed from the throne. They think the Stuart kings, you know, have been secretly crypto-Catholic. And then, aside from being anti-Catholic, they're based on things like natural law, so you have that contradiction. They don't want Catholic kings. They want a parliamentary tradition that makes Parliament stronger than the king, so they're pro-Parliament, and that they get it. You know, we weren't the first nation to do this. This comes from 17th century English politics. They really make Parliament the sovereign branch of government, no longer the king. They want natural law, but no Catholicism. And they have a few different theories about how you do this. One very famous one of we Americans is Locke. He's a late kind of Whig thinker. An earlier Whig is Grotius. And both Locke and Grotius and another guy called Pufendorf, and of course many people know Burke, who actually wasn't a Whig. He was Whig-like, but he wasn't a Whig. Were famous to the framers. If you look at, we'll skip over these other guys, but if you look at Locke's philosophy, it was nothing. Locke is the perfect representation of the Enlightenment man. Why? Because he's a polymath like a lot of these guys. He had a scientific philosophy. He fully was on board for this carbuncular science, which turned out to be precisely that, bunk. And yet he had these natural law politics, which are informative of arguably the best political tradition that's yet been conceived by the mind of man, upon which he says the 1688 English Glorious Revolution, which restored the England really to Protestantism, and the American Revolution later would definitely be based on Locke's natural law politics. And he does it all in a decidedly Protestant way. So again, I want you to see this clash here between having this natural law tradition in politics, where, so someone give me an example of what I mean by natural law tradition. What kind of political idea arises out of a natural law tradition? So I don't go too far without clarifying.
Men are created equal?
Right. Men are created equal, and laws should, to some extent, bear out that initial equality. And if laws aren't, at least sort of in a rough and ready fashion, sufficiently reflective of that truth, then men have the right to appeal to heaven, whereby they, have a revolution. Something like that. A bad law is no law at all.
And you're seeing here, inalienable rights separation of powers, so that's
Right.
just related.
You're right, not so much separation of powers, but natural rights go right in hand with natural law. So the rights don't come from the government, but from God. Government is erected to protect those rights. All these are natural law Enlightenment ideas. Again, like I say, we haven't overcome modernist political science. Well, thank God we have much better, medical science. But we haven't overcome their political science today. So, again, Locke says, get rid of the natural theology. As a good Protestant thinker, he's brutal on the Catholic Church. But take from natural theology natural law. And you can't do that. Because again, if your only font for looking to find an ethical template is the Bible, then you can't do natural law, right? You just have to be a divine command person. Hey, here's the Decalogue of the Old Testament. Here's the sort of addenda to the Decalogue prescribed by the New Testament. This is what government ought to do in some rough and ready way. There's no appeal to reason or you can't do that. You can't have natural law without natural theology. So, when the Stuart Kings finally do get banished from England, after about 50 years of struggling, in 1688, in the Glorious Revolution, Locke writes his second treatise of civil government the next year, 1689. And he's talking about what just happened. So, what you want to do, not that a lot of people nowadays think too much about the Glorious Revolution, but is link up 1688 and 1776. It was basically the same thing was happening. A kind of Protestant natural law revolution was happening in England in 1688, and then kind of a new version of that in 1776, except, then a new country was created. So, in America, this so-called Protestant natural law, I'm suggesting should be a contradiction in terms, springs up, and, America is founded as a strongly Protestant nation. And in the political theory, the humanists and the Protestants were more brought together in poli-sci than they were in any other tradition, right? I had Enlightenment humanists versus Protestants that said there's a tension in a lot of senses, but they're both basically, Protestant countries tend to be the ones that were very Lockean and were open to these natural law ideas in government. And they were right on board with Enlightenment thought in that way. So, the American Revolution, as you probably all know, was based on a Protestant natural law, even though it was all based on dispelling and mistrusting basically all things Catholic. Right? Remember, so in 1688 you'd have the Glorious Revolution in England. Less than 100 years later, you had people, not that they all emigrated in this time, some had been colonials for a long time, but in less than 100 years, you had people, the Puritan tradition in America, for whom the Anglican Church, or the Episcopalian Church, was not Protestant enough. They thought it looked too Catholic. It had too many remnant sacraments and too much magisterial teaching. So that's what happens. You want to see at least a historical, if you don't want to bridge the gap and make the big articulation of a principle, at least say historically, Protestant, they're not technically churches, but they tend to get smaller and smaller and smaller, almost by design, right? Because you have to be individualist and more individualist and more individualist, and this is what happens. So at the same time that the Puritans were saying the Anglicans were too Catholic and too powerful and conglomerated, Puritans within Puritans arose, and you basically get down to a church of one. But at the same time, it's all predicated on the natural law tradition, which is rightly a Catholic idea in the first place. So it's this deeply paradoxical thing to be an American Catholic. The country is really erected on our principles, but in name, largely against Catholicism. And I don't mean that in some, muckraking way. I just mean this is just a fact. This is what grew out of the Glorious Revolution.
I mean, going back to the like, you can thank Mr. George Lucas for selling his industry, because we Star Wars, you can kind of, if you look into this eyes of the church, you'll see that you Protestant, Mr. Lucas, the way he kind of made the Jedi Temple like a Buddhist analogy to Catholicism is a good kind of sci-fi interpretation of where we are now today. We're a minority opinion. That's my thought after looking back, like, why it's so popular.
Running
Many
through,
popular films run on Catholic kind of thinking.
Yeah. Well, it's true. I mean, you can't get, like you pointed out earlier, you can't get around the big ideas. And most of the big ideas were had early. So you do see sort of recapitulations, reiterations stemming up from culture to culture and in pop culture too.
It's funny though that also the Americas would be Protestant though they needed France to help in the war. Like realistically, idealistically it's Protestant, realistically we need France, we need thinkers, we need people from the other side to assist us in a revolution.
Yeah. And they didn't do their own revolution right though.
Yeah, that's big. Correct.
So just see this parallel between what was going on and the role that, again, the reaction to the Catholic Church played in both the Glorious Revolution and the American Revolution. Ultimately, I want to close with this transition. Why modernism died, and I've suggested what my answer is several times. It died because it was so freighted down with inherent contradiction. Even though it was otherwise it was really a great movement. A great, largely Protestant movement, which gave us great science. Could have been better if it would have been unified by a teleological view of the universe, but great science, raised basically the average life expectancy like 25 years in a couple centuries. I mean, I'm not so harsh on modern thought. Here are some of the main aspects of modern thought that I would generalize into characteristics. One, it's got a nominal presumption of theistic faith. So if you take a Locke, a John Locke or a Thomas Jefferson, you don't really know what's going on in these genius minds, but they nominally make lots of references to God. And I mean, maybe at most it's a sort of deistic faith, but it still leaves God in the equation. Man, in that capacity, in his relationship to God, is assumed to be perfectible for modern thinkers. So man can improve upon himself. Think here of like Benjamin Franklin's, self-made man guidebook. The tip to, get up at this time of the day, do this next. That's very Enlightenment centered. Nature, by the modernists, is presumed to be lower than man. It's sort of the subject of man's investigations, with his new science's new view of the world.